Hello and welcome to Geography Arcade. This week we are going to talk about Star Wars and colonialization. So I was thinking to myself recently that I wanted to bring somebody in to talk about Star Wars, and I have my good friend Jameson here today. How you doing, Jameson?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me. And you couldn't have picked a better person to talk about Star Wars, let me tell you.
Oh, now Jameson, you do the Download, which is a alternative gaming news show that you can find on all the podcast services. So let's just dive right into it. I'm ready to dive into the deep end right now.
Let's do it.
So let's talk about your history with Star Wars.
All right.
Obviously, you've seen the movies, you understand. But what was the first Star Wars video game that you played?
First Star Wars video game I ever played was Star Wars Rogue Squadron, followed by Shadow of the Empire.
Man, Shadow of the Empire. That's Dax. Or what was his name? Do you remember?
Dax. Spendar. I want to. Oh man.
Dash Rendar. I'm about to say Dax Shepard, but that is not. That's not what that is.
No.
Yeah, Rogue Squadron is like a pinnacle game for flying what we call in the biz the spaceships.
Yep.
So how many Star Wars games do you think you've played? I mean, I'm not looking for numbers, I'm not looking for a count up.
I'll name them. So those two already. Pod Racer. I've played all the Lego Star Wars, every single one.
Hell yeah! I'm here to represent.
Even the ones on handheld like Game Boy. I played the Star Wars Episode 3 game on Game Boy and on console. That one had a really sick, like Mortal Kombat Jedi battle mode. Super fun. I played Clone Wars. I played Commando. Played all the Battlefronts, the good ones and the bad ones. I've played even the old PC games, X-Wing Alliance and TIE Fighter.
This looks really cool.
I mean, I played Starfighter. I mean, if it's Star Wars, I probably played it.
So you're kind of an expert when it comes to Star Wars games. So what elements do you think elevate a Star Wars game? Because some Star Wars games are considered lesser than, but there's some that rise to the top. Some of the best RPGs and even shooters come from the Star Wars lineup of games. So what do you think elevates that?
You just made me think. I forgot Knights of the Old Republic, Outcast. I forgot the actual Old Republic. Again, if it has Star Wars in the name, I probably played it. Even mods. I think for me, there's so many things that I look for like in a Star Wars game, but one of the big things is I want it to feel like Star Wars when I'm playing, because not all the time you get into a game and it's like, oh man, this is Star Wars. Sometimes it's like, this is just another video game. And I got that a little bit with the most recent Battlefronts. I would say, it's like, oh man, this is a Star Wars game, but it's not like I don't feel like I'm in Star Wars. But one thing I will give them credit for is the sound effects in that were absolutely amazing. It was very much movie grade sound quality in those most recent Battlefronts. And that was one thing that definitely got me, because, you play the older games and it's like, oh man, this is super exciting and stuff. But then when you add in the top tier visuals and the top tier sound, that's what really kind of pieces it all together for me. I kind of look for different things, but the sound and the visuals are kind of there, because it's just, it has to feel like Star Wars and not like something else. For me, Battlefront felt like Battlefield, but with Star Wars. That's the easiest example I can think of.
Yeah, I think there's like a cohesive even like the Millennium Falcon has to look like the Millennium Falcon, but even if you see another ship or something, it has to look like you can tell the difference between a spaceship and a spaceship that's in Star Wars. Like you
Yeah.
can, there is some visual design, but I really, I guess, jumping off of that spaceship idea, spaceships are pretty big when it comes to the games themselves. Rogue Squadron, all of the. I even liked the third one. I think that was Rebel Strike. Most recently, Battlefront 2, and now we're coming out with this new game called Star Wars Squadrons, which
Yep.
looks really cool. So, what do you think? Why do you think that spaceships are so characterized in Star Wars? And what do you think adds to that character with spaceships?
So originally, and I've actually, this is how much I love Star Wars. Is I even took a course, a film course called it was film topics, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. I needed an extra credit, and I was like, come on, we're gonna watch George Lucas and Steven Spielberg movies and write about it.
Yeah.
Sign me up. Um, and so, you know, George Lucas's whole thing, when he wrote Star Wars, it's very much based on, the hero's journey. Classic tales like King Arthur, Odysseus, it's that kind of stuff. And it's this all about this battle between good and evil, and will the characters, triumph against evil. And so the way I see it is that the everything in Star Wars is an extension of that. The Jedi are an extension of good. They have light colored lightsabers, green, blue was the original. And then, the Sith are, red, it's power, it's evil. They have black. And so it's the same thing kind of with the Empire. Their ships are very angular, they're very harsh, they're very industrial looking. They're all meant to convey this intimidating, powerful aura. And then you get to like the rebellion, and we see lots of, especially at the Mon Calamari ships, we see lots of smooth and soft. And you again, because the rebellion is supposed to be like the people's group, you see lots of different styles of ships. Um, so that's kind of what I think he was going for in terms of like the ship design. Some of them absolutely bizarre, like just the whole different wing series, the A wing, the B wing, the X wing, the Y wing. Some of them pretty obvious why, but then you get others like the B wing. It's like, what is this weird foldy cross looking thing? So yeah, and then they kind of just expanded on that as they added more movies. You start to see so many different designs. I think probably one of my favorite things growing up was one of my friends had this. Must have come out in the early 2000s, like 2003, and it was like an encyclopedia of Star Wars, and each page was all that it had a page about the ship, talked about it, told you who made it, all of its armaments, and had all these descriptions. I absolutely was in love with this thing. Like I even borrowed it from my friend once so I could basically handwrite copy the book to keep a list. And like there was a time where I'd be like, oh, Imperial to Star Destroyer, I can tell you that came from the Cot Drive yards, and it's like huge, huge Star Wars nerd.
Did you have the? I just ran across it. I could probably put my hands on it right now. The books that had the ships where you could see inside them, and they had all of the different little bits and bobs.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
I'd seen a post on Reddit, and I was like, I'm curious if I still have those, and managed to put my hands on it. I was like, oh my gosh, crazy. So with all of this Star Wars excitement, are you excited for the new game, Star Wars Squadrons?
Very excited. I don't pre-order video games anymore. I've been burned many times since I became a PC gamer, and it all dates back to DayZ. DayZ was the beginning of the end for me. Um, Foolish me thinking that Arma 2 DayZ mod and making a standalone would be something. Turns out didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so that only carried on further. But I have to say, I pre-ordered Star Wars Squadrons, mostly because podcasting and streaming now. But it actually genuinely looked good. First person, sim like controls, no microtransactions, $40, two single player campaigns woven together. Like, sign me up.
Yeah, it seems like that EA is taking on a different kind of culture with that particular game, where it's like, let them do what they want. They get the say. We tried to do all the microtransactioning with Battlefront 2 or what have you, and this time you guys just take the lead here.
I think
We'll
Jedi
stand.
I think Jedi Fallen Order from Respawn was the perfect example of that. It's like, all
Mhm.
right, you guys handle this. They had some pressure from Disney, obviously, to go a certain direction. They wanted to go the bounty hunter gunslinger. Disney really wanted the Jedi, but they pretty much got to drive it where they wanted, and raving success.
Over this strange time, I've been thinking about Star Wars, and particularly the Galactic Empire. I've been watching videos of cosplays from the 501st and a number of different, I guess, pitches in relation to stormtroopers and mainly some of the comedy elements from the show The Mandalorian with stormtroopers. I think one of them was played by Jason Sudeikis. But it got me thinking, why is the Galactic Empire evil? And this kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. You would think that it's bad because it's controlled by an evil space wizard that rules the governing body in which they all encompass. But there are some things that are set up within the Galactic Empire that reinforce that idea. And if we want to go all the way back in history and think about what's evil about the Galactic Empire, we have to start with some of the first empires, particularly the Roman Republic. So we're all pretty familiar with the Romans being conquerors of most of Europe in ancient times. The problem with conquering land is the armies eventually move on or move forward and don't often come back to those areas. So the Roman Republic had no standing army. So they used to plan a number of their own citizens and conquered towns as kind of a garrison. Initially, these Roman groups would consist partly of Roman citizens, usually to the number of about 300. But after Emperor Augustus, the number was increased, and thousands of Roman legionnaires who retired from their legions were granted lands in many of the Colonia, which is the name of these settlements that the Romans had. In the first century of the Roman Empire, the colonies were only made of veterans and were responsible for the Romanization of many territories. So a lot of Italy, Spain. We often talk about the Romantic languages, and partially that's due to these multiple garrisons that they had. Colonialization really didn't pick up until the Age of Discovery. It's loosely defined as a period in European history in which extensive overseas exploration emerged as a powerful factor in European culture, most notably the discovery of the Americas, and during which time was the beginning of what is known today as globalization. Globalization is essentially a culture that is connected across the globe. So instead of just nations or towns, or there are no barriers in globalization. This has pros and cons. You're probably familiar with the most famous voyage of the Age of Discovery in the 1400s. This was a voyage by the Spanish crown executed by Christopher Columbus to the Americas. But this wasn't the first recorded colonization of America. A lot of people already know this, but 400 years prior to the Columbus expedition, there was a Scandinavian Viking by the name of Leif Erikson. He discovered parts of Canada and often talked about the trees and grapes and some of the different resources and even some battles with the Native Americans. Speaking on America being discovered, I think that's also kind of a silly idea because America has always existed. There has always been people in America, the Native Americans, tribes and civilizations that rose and fell before the Europeans came. We never say that Neil Armstrong discovered the moon, and I think about that a lot. And we could dive into the history of Christopher Columbus, but we're going to save that for another day because that's a very broad topic. So let me walk you through how colonialization works. And this is in broad terms. This is mainly a step-by-step of how to colonize somewhere. So normally the process is to send an expeditionary force to establish an outpost. This is what Christopher Columbus was. This is what Sir Walter Raleigh and the Jamestown. This was the Roanoke Island. That was your expeditionary force that would go and establish that outpost. The second part, which is often where people stumbled over at first, was fund them with resources. And these resources were to kind of start businesses, but mainly they were to survive, but also to kill and enslave the local populace. So obviously the people that were already there were not very happy about these colonizers out there killing them. So once the colonizers deemed it safe, they create a primary resource commodity that the colony sells in order to generate revenue. This is often crops, particularly in the American South. Tobacco was a thing and was a thing for hundreds of years and still is a thing today. But that was, I believe, their primary cash crop. And I think it was the cash crop for most of the American colonies. I'm kind of using the American colonies as a great jumping point because that's one of the easier ones to understand. So once they start generating revenue, that's when they send colonists to expand and reinforce the operation. So that's when you start sending some skilled labor, prisoners, ne'er-do-wells to essentially work for the crown or the government. And that's how they keep all the operations running and keep kind of a caste system in place. Of course, there was indentured servitude and slave trade. Colonialization is something that the rich really profited from. It was not meant for people of poor economy, outsiders. They were either put to work by an indentured servitude or were enslaved, and their families were enslaved for years and years. So once the colonies have wealth and it's established, then they start taxing resources. And those resources are sent from their home country, and they won't allow you to buy resources from other countries, and that's to generate this, really the beginnings of a monopoly in what we understand it, and then increase their profit. The piece in between is you need to protect these resources, and so that's why you have a lot of these fleets of ships that would protect the goods, because that was the main way that you got goods in that colonialization time. So you had to set up kind of a war economy where you were mass manufacturing weapons, where you were building a bunch of ships and artillery, essentially to keep your investments safe. So in Star Wars, this is actively what the Galactic Empire has done. They are colonizers, and colonizers truly believe that they are saving what they call savages from an unproductive existence and giving them a new purpose that serves the means of the world. This is what the Spanish thought they were doing when they were killing all of the Native American populations. Same thing for the British, French, so on and so forth. This is what the Galactic Empire thinks. They think that they are bringing law and order and stability to the galaxy, when in all actuality, there is a huge trade-off that they have to deal with. And it's interesting because the term savages came from this colonialization era, when savages were literally people with their own culture and their own rules and laws, and maybe not as technologically advanced, but had a society that functioned independently and didn't have a need for these Spanish, British, so on and so forth, governing bodies to save them. And in Star Wars, you see this effect in a lot of the different planets. I often think of how Kashyyyk, which is the home planet of the Wookiees, deals with enslavement. A lot of the Wookiees are large and strong and are put into servitude unwillingly because they are of a physiology that can accomplish these tasks. It's sad. You get this Chewbacca character who's comic relief and good and fun, but there's this deep level of pain. You have other planets in Star Wars that have economic operations, like Kessel's mining operation. We see that in the movie Solo, and if you've seen the movie, you kind of know how that goes. A great example is also the moon of Endor, which is where those wonderful, sweet Ewoks live. and the amount of changes that they've had to their life with the stormtroopers showing up. The thing is, they can't manage this gigantic galactic empire without protecting their investments. This is why the Emperor, before he was the Emperor, originally made a clone army, and then on the back burner had something like the Death Star rolling. We could also look at other evil Star Wars empires, like the Sith from Knights of the Old Republic. They utilized the Star Forge as a means to mass produce ships. So that was their super weapon, was this thing that funded the entire army through some magical star harvesting power factory. We could even look at the secret Starkiller base from Episode 7, which is essentially not only a factory and base for the First Order, but also this massive, multiple planet destroying weapon. There's a cycle that it kind of plays out in the background of the Star Wars movies and games, in that the native populations tend to remain rightfully furious from the beginning of the Imperial occupation. There's been seldom stories of local populations fighting back in world history, but oftentimes there's been collaborations from current colonists and the native populations working together to overthrow the colonizing powers. And even that pair doesn't have a great deal of monetary wealth. So, for example, in the American Revolution, the revolutionaries had to petition France to get funding because the colonists were fairly poor because they were being taxed by the British, and the Native Americans were fairly poor because all of their resources had been taken away from them. The Galactic Republic is kind of insular and almost can be seen as racist. A lot of people would just say that they're racist and generally only deal with 2 or 3 alien species within their ranks historically. The rebellion has this advantage, though. While they're smaller, they can work with these local populations to ensure freedom for both. I think that there's a line, though, in those stories where they shouldn't be the quote-unquote saviors of these people. The native population should be their own saviors for themselves. But it goes to serve the purpose of Star Wars, much like the Ewoks of Endor, working together with the Rebel Alliance. Obviously, they didn't have blasters, but they had wooden logs and stones to throw at the different machinations of the Galactic Empire, or even some political folks like Lando on Cloud City, or even in the sequel trilogy, like the rebels working with slaves on the casino planet to overthrow this rich getting richer scheme. When Star Wars came out, it was very easily... When Star Wars came out, it was pretty easy for Americans to picture themselves as the heroes because of the American Revolution. The Americans were the ones that overthrew the evil British Empire with all of their resources and same uniforms with the redcoats, and that was us, and we win, and we worked with people, and we had saved our country and have completed our rebellion. But George Lucas was inspired by a different story. He was inspired by Vietnam. And the Vietnam occupation was heavily politicized in America, and there were massive amounts of protests against the direction that the federal government was taking our country into these foreign wars. George Lucas saw the original trilogy as an allegorical protest of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The movies had definitive bad and good guys, so most moviegoers saw this plucky rebellion through the lens of the American Revolution. In truth, the most recent country involved in mass-producing arms, colonizing foreign settlements, and using massive weapons of destruction was America. The young, plucky rebellion utilizing alternative fighting methods and trying to survive was the Viet Cong. Oftentimes we think about globalization as a good thing, but sometimes it can be a double-edged sword. Right now, human rights are constantly improving by the connecting nature that began with colonization and most recently was expanded by the internet age. But cultures are slowly dying due to homogenization and gentrification. War over resources and politics is easier to spot, but the true colonialization progress is happening with memes, TV, and even video games. After doing my research, it seems like the Galactic Empire are indeed the quote-unquote bad guys. Even with good intentions, an immense amount of direct suffering occurs because of their actions. But gosh, those red lightsabers do look pretty cool. first off this week, I want to thank Jameson for coming on the show and talking a little bit about Star Wars. Jameson, why don't you tell the people what you've got going on in your life and what you're up to?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, I am one of the co-hosts of the Download Alternative Gaming News. We are a gaming news podcast on the Robots Radio Network. My co-host is Brenna, and together we kind of take the news that the mainstream gaming outlets give it to you, and we kind of break it down, give it to you straight and without all of the bias that they tend to have nowadays. They used to be so pure and wholesome, and now they're so corporate. So we're trying to give it to you like they used to. But as far as things we got cooking, we started year 2 recently, second year of our show, which is pretty awesome. So we've been testing some new formats. We've got a website coming out soon. But things are kind of really starting to fire on all cylinders for us. You know, we like to just, give you the news as it is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad stuff happening in gaming right now, but hopefully the outcomes from all that will be better for players, and that's all that really matters. But we're kind of, shows everywhere you can find podcasts, and then we are all over social media: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We're either at DL Gaming News or at Goosecat Prod, which is our little production company. But the best place to kind of keep up on everything is our Discord. Chat with our community and all that.
Yeah, they've been keeping up with the Apple versus Epic debate that has been happening.
Or with my dyslexia or autism, it's Epic or Epic. Not wait, Apple. I think I said at one point. I was a mess that episode.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show.
I have,
of course, thank you very much for having me.
Where the show is going to be hosted, and so it is on the old Vault Boys WV platform. It just has a little bit of a name change. So if you're previously subscribed and you're listening to this episode, that means you are in the right place. I had some issues with that previous account, so now everything's up and rolling. It takes us a little bit to get everything together. As always, you can find us on social media at Geography Arcade or the Geography Arcade. I've decided to open up the email to listeners. I had so much fun doing this with Vault Boys, and I want to bring it back. So if you have any thoughts on geography within the latest games or your latest trips or some thoughts and questions for the show, please email me at thegeographyarcade@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can figure out how to spell geography and arcade on your own because I believe in you. Next week, I want to continue the conversation on imperialism, kind of jumping off this colonization. It's almost a two-parter. I'm planning to sit down with a very special guest yet again. Thank you all and have a great week.